And you are welcome along to the latest Huddle Breakdown with a different host and this imposter who's dressed up like Laura Bradburn. Can you peel off your face, Laura? I know we've gone to great expense to play this prank.
It's a hair, I'd like to say.
But yes, the triumphant return of Alan Morrison. Welcome back, Alan.
Thank you very much. Yes, we're good to be back. I've missed you all, of course.
Yeah, no, excited to have you back. Laura is out this week, so we'll look forward to getting her back next week. But yeah, so you're stuck with me after having to live through me for 3 weeks. Now the audience has to actually listen to me host, which is even worse. So this is the universe conspiring to screw our audience over. I mean, it is 2025. Look at the state of the world, and me having to host after being the sole person talking on this dopey show for 3 weeks. It's just a nightmare. But so yeah, we're going to review the game, obviously, the St. Mirren game, and we're going to kind of revisit the transfer window status. Alan's got, Alan's like a guy married 20 years like I am. He's pent up. He's got like 3 weeks of stuff to share with the audience here. So he's ready to rock. He's got a lot of pent up energy and ideas, and to revisit some of the stuff that we've talked about and all of the unfoldings. Well, I guess it's not really unfoldings. It's just reaction to non-unfoldings. It would maybe be a better way to put it.
Well, James, I've got someone's got to kind of stand up to your one-man mission to destroy Dermot Desmond, to actually destroy the man. Personally,
I'm carrying not personally, but yeah, I joked with someone. We seem to be heading down a road, maybe geopolitically, towards a cycle of coups. So, yeah, maybe a coup of some sort in leadership. It's not like Celtic's history isn't, had some of those events in the past where boards are overthrown and et cetera, et cetera. But I say that tongue in cheek, obviously. But so, yeah, let's get into it first with the game from the weekend, the comfortable 1-0 win at home to St. Mirren on Flag Day. So let's start with the high level stuff. You've already gone through your capturing of the data and put out the stat pack for subscribers, and so you have an extra special expertise on this game that exceeds my own. So let's start with you. What do you think?
Yeah. I felt I ought to get on it, having been away for so long, and also post holiday, we've all got this horrible chesty lurg, so I had nothing better to do than sit around and actually get on with it. So I wasn't being distracted by being able to get out of the house or anything like that. So yeah, that's up on the site now, the stat pack, and a reminder that I was listening to Jonathan Wilson's excellent podcast again. It was what it was, and they were interviewing Rafa Benitez about his time at Liverpool. Rafa Benitez is one of these absolute students of the game. I mean, he studies everything about the game. He's a detail guy. He loves data, and he has a whole section on his show about. He was asked to write the UEFA a report by UEFA on the 2024 European Championships. One of these technical reports, you might have seen them. FIFA do them, UEFA do them. They write quite detailed, long form technical reports about the trends and in the matches that have unfolded in these big tournaments. And he said, "Well, have you got the data from the last X number of tournaments? Because I need the data to compare. I can't form conclusions without looking at the data." And then he looked at it, he said, "Yeah, but that's a different vendor. So on this vendor, you're telling me that this central defender averages 30 kilometers an hour average speed, and on this one it's 34. That doesn't make any sense." And he's explaining all this, and I'm thinking, yes, this is exactly the point, right? We've got all these data vendors. Everyone thinks they've got all this data available, and we have. I mean, any of you out there have got options now to harvest data from FBref, from FOTMob, from all these sort of places. But there's a big but, and it might not matter to you, and I accept that also, in terms of you might just be looking for directional steer from the data, not detail and trends and comparators. But if you want to do long-term trend analysis and like-for-like comparison, you need a certain consistency of data. So the reason I'm saying all of that is these stat packs whether you like them or not, they are consistent. They are to a quality because I spend a number of hours spent doing them, and it's only me doing them. It's not like I'm overseeing an army of, minimum wage slaves in some godforsaken hot shack somewhere at the other side of the world that's churning all these things and codifying them for me. So the consistency is there, and it allows you to compare like for like, apples to apples. The other thing is these stat packs is the only place that you'll get every Celtic game. A lot of the vendors, in fact, none of the vendors do the League Cup, for example, and have very, very limited data on the Scottish Cup. So the only place you'll get all Celtic data for all matches is the stat pack. So if that doesn't make you subscribe, I don't know what will. So there you go. I'll come back and annoy you all with an advert. See how many people switch off now. But anyway, the game. Sorry, St Mirren. So St Mirren, right? So yeah. Yep. So listen, it was kind of frustrating, right? But again, you have to give St Mirren credit. And when we get into the detail of it, I've got a piece. I thought I'd go back and look at all the games that Celtic have played against St Mirren in the league under Stephen Robinson, and see how different this game was at a high level, reasonably high level, versus that game. So I can show you that in a bit. But the one thing that concerned me, because I think all the issues around performance in general, in terms of if you want to look at individual player performance, are utterly predictable. There's nothing new, I don't think, particularly that we learned. We didn't learn anything new about Yang. Scales had one of his good games. Great. Good credit to him. He was fine. We're relying on a 34-year-old coming off the bench. Adamida, all these sort of things. We know about all this. There was nothing new about that. But two things occurred to me, really. One, I'm not saying that ones that are either positive or negative. They're just sort of themes, if you like, that formed in my mind. One is that Celtic looked a bit not quite ready for the season. And it was the same with watching Aberdeen Hearts last night. Aberdeen didn't look like this was their first game of the season, whereas Hearts, it was the fourth game, and it really showed. And it showed to me that St Mirren looked like they were playing the fourth game of the season and we were playing our first. I'm surprised about that because last season, in this situation, I thought we hit the ground pretty hard, and those games in the US seemed to really accelerate the development of the team towards kind of match fitness, and we don't seem to have done that this season. So that's topic number one. Topic number two is that despite all that, Celtic won the game. Okay, outcome versus performance. I'll show you the performance later. Even though Celtic were, let's call it, half-baked in terms of match readiness, the fundamentals of performance were pretty solid, actually, and were pretty consistent with how they would normally perform in these games, as I'll show you. And what that and the other theme that I want us to, I think, we'll explore as the show goes on, was this notion of cohesiveness, the cohesiveness of Celtic. So although they're a little bit half baked, and although we've not got the freshness of new signings, and although we've got some suboptimal players playing in certain positions, the collective cohesiveness of Celtic and the way that they play under Rodgers, and the fact that everyone knows their jobs, I think helped Celtic navigate their way to, albeit a late win. And the reason that I'm making a big thing of that is because we've built this season up quite a lot, and we've now seen all the teams play their first hand and seen their first performances, and the theme for me of the weekend is cohesiveness. I'm not necessarily talking about quality. I'm not necessarily talking about potential. I'm just talking about the level of cohesiveness in performances, because I think there's some really interesting things that we can take from that first weekend. And that's maybe a thing that we'll get on to later in the show after we've covered the St Mirren game.
So what is the one of the aspects that I found notable, and I'm going to save the selection questions on who started, and then I think more, not importantly, but more notably, was the composition of the bench and who he decided to bring in as the second striker. Rodgers decided to bring in. But to me, the most interesting kind of tactical aspect of the game, because we've speculated a lot about this KT butterfly effect, as you've coined it. We've been horribly wrong so far in guessing that it would go to a 4-2-3-1. all kinds of interesting implications about that. But it looks like we're kind of settling on a 3-2-5 in build up with, one of the right or the left back, filling in as the Lustig role, and then the other one inverting. More so, KT was the Lustig role, and then Alistair Johnson inverting. How did you think that? Because that was basically what it looked like most of the time in preseason. But again, until you get to a competitive game, you never really know. So kind of followed through on that. It looked like. So how did you think that worked? What would you think of the left side with Kieran Tierney kind of fulfilling that role? Maeda, that I wrote about this in my column that went up on Monday, was we kind of like doubled Maeda's involvement and build-up versus what it's been recently. And when he's played on the left, as far as like the number of touches he had and passes he played and that kind of stuff, particularly from like outside the attacking third, which I don't like. I'm not a big fan of that at all, because I don't think that really aligns with his strengths and weaknesses. So how did you think overall it worked tactically? Because that to me is, and would you agree, that seems to be the major tweak as far as how that coherence has been modified just a little bit?
Yeah. So first two things that occur is I think there's an impact defensively and there's an impact offensively, and I think one's largely positive and the other one may not be quite as positive. So defensively, let's start with that. I was pretty pleased with how solid we were as a general rule. Now you might think, well, we're home to St Mirren, they're bunkered in, but they're playing two up front, and we have had issues with this kind of long ball sort of hit the front men and break type of thing. And they had some moments, and actually in the second half, I think it was Ayunga twice had through balls to play, and he butchered both of them. And they had that one moment where they did cut the ball back to the centre of the box, and I think it was Smith got a shot in that Johnson blocked.
Yeah.
Yes, but I'm remembering these very clearly because they were the only real moments in the game. And actually, St Mirren, again, when I show my comparator later, we'll see they actually created a lot less than what they normally create at Celtic Park, even under Robinson. So even a very good sort of match-ready St Mirren team, I think we kind of defensively dealt with them quite well. Now, was it because of that tweak? I don't know. But the other aspect of it is that Tierney and Johnson were probably two of our stronger performers on the day. And I think this because both of them, I think, are happy being the third centre back. So I don't think that's a big stretch for them. So there's no kind of loss of comfort there. There's no stretch as far as capabilities there. And both of them found ways to actually, provide threat in the final third. Now, you might argue that, well, that's because there was such a lack of ability to create threat from the wingers. Because, with Maeda, he kind of gets a pass, right? Because we don't think of him as a traditional winger. We don't expect him to receive the ball, do a trick, get by a man, whip a cross in. He might nudge the ball past and just through sheer pace, and he did that a few times, and did get crosses in actually. And we don't expect him to get balls like even a Luis Palma, who one of his strengths was to perhaps to get the ball cut in and then play little through balls into the half spaces through the channels, etc. He's never going to do that, Maeda. That's just not his game. So, but we give him a pass because of his threat in behind, and because of his work rate off the ball, and because of his goal scoring, what he had in the goal scoring stage. So that's fine. On the other hand, on the other side we've got Yang, and Yang didn't really produce anything. He had a couple of nice passes in open play, but in terms of he received the ball, he generally always cut inside. And he never even went forward, he went sideways, and he was passing sideways. The only time that he really helped the team, I think, was in an attacking sense, was when Johnson, bust a gut to go down the outside of him and overlap, and then that created a couple of moments, especially in the first half. So, in a sense, Tierney and Johnson were the wide attacking threat. And I think they're fairly decent at that. I mean, Tierney looked pretty effortless getting away from his man on a couple of occasions. It looked like he looked like a top English Premier League player playing against a much lower level of opponent. And that's Tierney obviously not fully up to speed yet in terms of match fitness. So I'm not worried about those two, the two fullbacks. I'm far more worried about obviously what's in front of them. I understand why we're playing Maeda wide left. He's clearly the best centre forward at the club, as far as we've said this till we're green in the face. But for lack of having literally anyone else that can play in that role, we have to play him in that role. I thought Forrest was excellent when he came on. I mean, he didn't actually create a chance or have a shot, but he simply drove them backwards. He kept pushing them backwards. We won endless corners, and I know nothing directly came from Forrest, but he kept them basically camped in their own half, and he just set an attacking tone. He set an example of intent from the team, which we just didn't get really from Yang at all. So I think, like you say, you cannot divorce the tweaks because of Tierney coming in with the role of what's in front of those two players. But I think the fact that those two players were the strongest, arguably the two strongest players in the team, Scales, I think, would be up there. Forrest for his cameo. It tells you something about that if that has been the tweak, they're fine with it. It'll be fine in that sense. But the worry is how we get creativity in those wide areas.
Yeah, the other part of it that gives me some, because again, I'm always trying to look for things to be worried about. That's what I do. Is if Tierney is going to be in the Lustig role and deeper, that does kind of necessitate then that the winger be more involved on that side, along with presumably Hatate, in facilitating buildup. So it's a horses for courses type thing. It's like if Maeda is going to play left, he's going to have to do that job. And again, then we start talking about the connectivity issues of putting players in roles that they're not necessarily that good at. So that would be one concern. And the flip side of that, I think he's fine against St. Mirren at home, this kind of situation. But I question as we scale up against quality of opponent, making AJ the kind of explicit inverting fullback. I don't think he's Greg Taylor in the sense of, to your point, like he looks just as comfortable, I would argue more comfortable as the right center back in a 3. So we almost have two fullbacks that are better suited for the Lustig role, but one of them is going to have to invert because we seem, come hell or high water, situated on McGregor being the sole midfielder that stays deep and keeping the eights high and attacking. Now, again, there's some interchangeability. It looked like, when AJ did bomb on, sometimes you would get Nygren dropping. And, so Nygren did play a role in dropping deeper, and Hatate as well. So, again, all these things are dynamic. But so those are two things that, I'm not sure I love the setup. I'm not sure I like it as much as even, you know what I mean? Like I think what we might be picking up on, let's say the dramatic uptick in quality of Tierney, I'm worried that a material amount of that uptick is diluted by now saying, oh, Maeda is going to be the build up left winger and AJ's got to be the inverted fullback. Like I think that drags some of the value of the upgrade at left back. But again, we'll see. And that ultimately, as we get into the conversation about what's going on across the league over the weekend towards the end of the show, is we have no idea how this is all going to work out right now. Like the last 3 weeks here, including for us, could be hugely important. God help us if it's not, as far as, additional signings coming in. So, I'm not one to be running around with my hair on fire about some of these issues because, again, we just don't know. But why don't we transition to the graphic you have then for again, just to kind of benchmark the performance of against St. Mirren. What has this looked like generally in the past against the Stephen Robinson St. Mirren?
Yep. So what this is showing, and I appreciate it's a lot of numbers, so let me try and bring it to life a little bit more. So this is Celtic games against St Mirren at Celtic Park in the league with Stephen Robinson as the manager, and he's been in situ at St Mirren since 22, and this covers around, I think it's about 9 games maybe. So it's a decent sample size actually. And what the first two columns in the sort of green and white are Celtic's numbers. The first set of numbers are Celtic's key. These are the key sort of match day metrics, if you like, from the game at the weekend. And the one in green with the white numbers are the averages over the period in since 2022, really. And what the main takeaway, honestly, the main takeaway from this is, and we can whittle the detail, but the main takeaway, I would say, is that this was pretty similar to how Celtic have performed against the Stephen Robinson St Mirren since 2022. It really wasn't that much different. And I think a lot of that is down to, despite the selection issues, despite the wide creativity depth, despite Nygren, it's his first game and he's clearly going to take a bit of time to get up to speed. All of those things, despite the options on the bench, etc. Because we're now into the third year of Rodgers and we're playing in a similar way, albeit, caveat of the tweaks that we've talked about to accommodate Tierney, it's broadly the same way. We managed to create a fairly consistent performance relative to the other times we've played St Mirren under Stephen Robinson. And remember, Stephen Robinson's St Mirren would fit into the category of, I would say, if you had a spectrum of cohesiveness of teams, and by cohesiveness I mean the predictability, and I don't mean that in a negative, I just mean in a I think let's call it repeatability of style of play, and fit of player relative to that, and their ability to hit that consistency of performance week after week after week, all within the context of the players that St Mirren can afford and the inherent quality of them. I would classify St Mirren as a highly coherent team under Robinson. And therefore, they are not a straightforward opponent. They give you difficulties. They defended very well. If you look at the average position chart, which is in the stat pack, of St Mirren, they were incredibly compact. They were very, very disciplined in their defensive shape without the ball. That takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of training. It takes players that are listening and responding to each other, and it takes a good coach, and it takes players that are take these things on board. So this is all within the context of wage budget and what have you. Celtic should be winning these games, and if you look at the differential, they're huge. Average difference in non-penalty XG is over 1.2 in all these games. So Celtic should be winning in most of these games, and they do. They've drawn 2 of them and won 7. So that's as expected, but that isn't to downgrade how effective St Mirren are with the resources that they have. But the main takeaway is that Celtic's performance over all these metrics, they completed more passes. They actually, despite St Mirren pressing like maniacs to over 200 pressures in the game, Celtic managed to actually achieve more passes per defensive action in this game than they do on average against St Mirren. St Mirren have been half that number of pressures in some games. The one thing is Celtic didn't generate a huge number of shots, 14 versus an average of 17. I think we felt that on the day, but the post shot XG was slightly higher than average. The XG was slightly down. The packing score was higher. We were getting through the lines, having more possessions in the box. So there really wasn't a huge difference. There's nothing here that screams Celtic underperformed relative to playing this opponent, in the league. And on the St Mirren side, in terms of how did we allow them to play? How did they perform? Again, very, very similar. In fact, their XG was lower. As I mentioned, they had slightly less numbers of shots. Their packing score was slightly lower. They had a couple more possessions in the box. Their goalkeeper had to make a couple more saves, and the save from George from Nygren at half time was an astonishing save. I mean, it was sort of Gordon Banks against Pele type save. It was absolutely phenomenal. The only thing that was really marginally different about St Mirren's performance, and given we've had sticky games against them, right, was the extent of their pressing. They were, again, this probably speaks to where they are in their season relative to us. They felt they could press like maniacs, if you like, as James would say. 200 pressures. That's the only real difference in their style of play. So this is kind of a, we might all be a little bit down disgruntled about, it was a bit of a sticky game. We only won 1-0. It wasn't exactly, all that. But we've had games against St Mirren like this in the past. The good news is that the strength of the system on our side, at least we got over the line on it, and therefore I guess what I'm saying is I'm not too worried. This was easily in the ballpark of how we always perform against this team at Celtic Park, against Stephen Robinson's well-organised side. So that was really the message there, is that it was an early season performance. Yes, it was sticky. Yes, it was a bit ploddy, but it was well within the ballpark of how we normally perform against this side.
Yeah, the one thing that I'll throw in that kind of stood out to me was, I think, partly under our control and partly, I mean, I think generally we're highly complimentary of Stephen Robinson within the context of managers in Scottish football. But it, as my friends in Scotland would say, it does my nut in that they do not do a better job. I mean, obviously against us, I don't care. I'm happy, but just generally, because he's generally a pretty good coach, that they do not optimize set pieces, and they don't take long throws all the time. They don't, against us at Celtic Park, if you're within the ability to kick the ball into they call it zone 14, right above our box, to not shell balls into that area and try to create chaos every single time you can, to me, in this modern era, is kind of managerial negligence. And the reason why I get into that is they had 0 XG from set pieces. And, now I don't know if you have in front of you, I don't think they had any corners, did they?
No, they had one in the second half.
One. Okay. Yeah.
I don't think they had one in the first half. I think it was one in the second half.
Yeah.
Remember.
So again, it's more so the throw-ins, and I'm just like, how are you not just shelling those throw-ins in the box?
I was picturing Thomas Grunemark. The one in the second half when Scales nearly conceded a goal, when we had the ball in their half and he threw it back and we almost conceded a goal. That was just like, oh my God!
I know.
Yeah, so I'd forgotten how long Kieran Tierney takes to throw the ball in.
Right.
And this is something that when he was 21, he wasn't good at it, and it looks like he hasn't improved. So
yeah,
Kieran was great. Kieran was great, but that's never been a strength.
No, it's funny because it's one of those things where once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. It's like flipping the switch, and like I could tell. We'll get into this later, but having watched the Aberdeen Hearts game, I could tell that Thomas has not been to Edinburgh yet, because Hearts were not doing what our friend Thomas would say that they should be, and would certainly coach them to do. So yeah, it's just crazy. And again, to credit, I think Dundee United have really done a great job in starting last season in leveraging that. So yeah, that was a part that was notable to me anyway, that, and we did a good job of preventing it too. I mean, that's the other thing, like that is avoiding, conceding those kind of situations, to a team like St. Mirren is hugely valuable in contributing to keep that, XG differential comfortable or more comfortable. So yeah, let's put a bow on that game then. 'Cause again, I agree. As to specifically the game performance, let's get into, because I think this leads into the conversation on the transfer window. I was very annoyed not to see Inamora in the squad, as you could imagine, given that I am, he's replacing Lennon Miller. Since Lennon Miller is leaving the league, he's going to be, I'm the patron saint of the Inamora fan club. So I particularly because Callum McGregor almost never gets subbed out. What's the point of Bernardo on the bench? Because he wasn't going to play. And the idea that Tierney was going to play 90 minutes, they would have known given what happened. I mean, his data must have been in his fitness ramping up. Like, it had to have been obvious to them that it was unlikely that Tierney was going to finish the whole game. So that means that they went into the game with the plan of Liam Scales being the left back, wasting a position on the bench for Bernardo instead of carrying Inamora and having him be the sub on at left back. To me, that is nuts. I don't get it. I mean, you don't even have to be the biggest fanboy like I am of Inamora to see that he's better than Scales at left back, even, with the relatively modest experience that he has there. So that I found that kind of annoying. And the other part I didn't find annoying, but I thought it was notable. People talk about is there a message being sent or whatever, but Kenny coming in is over Yamada. It's not like Yamada's, just into preseason and was a late signing. He didn't, maybe not match fit, that type of thing. I mean, he's coming from midseason from Japan. So the idea that he's not fit enough to play 15, 20 minutes, I think is kind of silly. So I thought that those two moves were notable because particularly the Inamura one, it almost seems so dumb that there was something going on other than like wasting the spot on the bench when you could have really needed a left back. So what are your thoughts on those two things specifically, and then just generally the comments from Rodgers last week, kind of the roller coaster, and how you feel like the window's been so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think fan sentiment is supportive of Rodgers in terms of the comments he's been making about the need to get quality in, which he'll always say, and that's his job to do that. But equally, I'm irked with him in his comments about, Inamura and Yamada in particular, because, I'm not, and will take a long time to forgive him for undermining Trusty to such an extent with his weakest pish faux pas. I mean, that's a sort of, like, I've called that his Gerard Ratner moment, which I'm not sure if that translates to American, but
not to me. I don't know what that means.
So Gerard Ratner, maybe this is one that probably I need to cover for younger viewers as well, was the CEO of a very successful kind of high street, i.e. sort of cheap jewelry chain. They called Ratners, and Ratners had stores on every high street in every town in the country, and they sold kind of, they sold jewelry. It wasn't particularly expensive, so everyone could feel they had stuff that looked expensive, right, but it wasn't, type of thing, and it was very popular. I'm talking about the 80s here.
Yeah.
And at the peak of their powers, Ratner gave a speech at some conference or some, I don't know if it was an AGM or what it was, but it didn't really matter, where he basically said, oh yeah, we're really, he more or less said, I'm paraphrasing, he more or less said, it's amazing that we're doing so well because basically we're selling people shit. And the company basically almost died overnight, right?
Yeah.
And so talking about Ratner, to me, that for so far as Trustee is concerned, that was his Ratner moment. So the problem I have with Rodgers and the whole sort of dynamics of signing Inamura and Yamada is this notion that, it's a club signing. Well, for fuck's sake, they're all club signings. Every single player is a club signing, right? You are part of the chain and a key signatory sign-off party to every signing, right? And you've said this repeatedly. So don't then turn around and tell us that, I didn't sign that one, I signed that one and all that stuff. Because that just fuels the worst fan, conspiracy theories. And it just undermines the players and undermines the whole club, actually. And I don't buy it. And the second thing is, what exactly is it that we want? We've spent years talking about Celtic's structure, the lack of modernization, and one of the pillars was that is this moving away from this whole notion of manager as God, where the manager gets to choose every player that Celtic signs, irrespective of whether, from a medium to long-term perspective, they fit into the playing ethos and strategy of the club. Now, we can have a debate of whether we think Celtic have that. I think that, again, it's easy to sort of use that trope. But if the club are signing players at very low cost and therefore very low risk and on low wages, who, like Yamada and Inamura, who, by the way, very early days, but from what I've seen, look quite promising, right? And Celtic, and we want Celtic as a club to plan for the future, i.e., future without Rodgers, and thinking about 3, 5, 10 years time. Then that's exactly how modern clubs behave, and the coach is there not just take what what he gets. He should be part of the sign-off. He should be part of the review. He should have a voice in saying yay or nay to all of these signings. Absolutely. But it's almost like, we can't have our cake and eat it, right? If you're going to be a modern football club is going to make signings like this and say, look, this guy fits into their style of play, has all these attributes that match exactly how we play, et cetera, et cetera, and make him better, that kind of thing. So that's really annoying, I guess. And yeah, to not have either of them figure, given, like you say, I was trying to wrap my brains to remember where they would have been in the Japanese season. Would they be a little bit, behind? But I think you said there that they were actually kind of mid-season effectively. So in many ways, they may well have been ahead of the other players from a fitness perspective. So yeah, I think that was irksome. It's more worrying that what does that say, and especially the comments that Rodgers made on the end of before the match. What does that say about the state of play in terms of the key relationships at the club? That's the really worrying part of it.
I agree with that. Again, it's a one-off game. I mean, maybe Inamura had a knock in training on, Friday, right? So you're right. So to overreact, and like I usually do, when my man crush gets screwed over by a manager. But I agree with you. What, to me, within the context of what he said, within the context that he's had this problem at every club he's been at since Liverpool. Again, I don't know about Swansea and Reading, but at least the last 15 years. And within the context of, I don't think, and I've said this before, he's probably not the person you want profiling signings. And so the idea that he might get, so this may not even be about resources, which I think it probably is to a degree. Mm-hmm. There could be a degree on, the joint show that we did with Celtic Underground, with what Harry Brady said about kind of negotiating strategy and how that's been used in the past, what he's heard, leaving things late because they think it's a positive negotiating strategy, irregardless of whether you think that's smart or not, or even if it's true or not. I think it's plausible that we're going to sign a few higher priced players. When I say higher price, 4, 7, 10 million, something like that, before the end of the window. Maybe they're just not the ones that Rodgers wants. And so I'm getting the same signal that I had when, my spidey senses are going off like it was in the autumn of 2023 when I said, oh man, it looks to me like there's starting to be a bit of a civil war inside Celtic, when he was starting to say comments like, not like this exactly, but directionally like this, when it was like, okay, that disaster of a window when he first came in, and the Mark Lawwell. So it's basically, are we just swapping out Mark Lawwell for Paul Tisdale? Because Tisdale, from his own words, the way he characterized it at the fan forum, again, portrayed by people that were there in attendance, so firsthand accounts, was that he just got started on recruitment in spring. So up until then, he'd been working on academy stuff and that kind of stuff. So he hadn't really directed his attention, which is mystifying to me in and of itself. But, can we spin a couple of plates at a time here, guys? But okay, there's only so many hours in a day. He's just getting around to recruitment. This window so far, I'm actually content with, from a profiling perspective. I see a dramatic uptick in some level of coherence from what had been complete incoherence over the last couple of years. So I think Yamada at 1.5 or 2 million is a way better signing, irregardless of the money, even than Ida is or was at 9 million. And that I rail on about this all the time, the importance of profiling relative to the style of play, how the player is going to be used. I just talked about with Maeda. So the fact that, again, Rodgers is tweaking his system to make Maeda a build-up winger, and this goes back to the Ian Graham book he just put out not too long ago, and talking about this specific case study, I'll quote, with what went on with Rodgers at Liverpool. He wanted a hold-up striker in a system that did not warrant a hold-up striker, but he wanted it. So I worry that we're in another kind of battle internally, and the fact that he said he hasn't been made a contract offer yet, to me, speaks to that. Again, I'm speculating here, but circumstantial evidence. I assume he's not lying about that, which again, in and of itself, that would be crazy if he would lie about something like that in public to try and get leverage over the board. I mean, I'd be shocked if that were the case. So there just may be a parting of the ways here as far as like, how are we selecting players? I don't know. Like, that seems plausible given his history, and that Tisdale's actually working on it now. And reportedly, like, there's been all kinds of buzz that he's out looking at players, and like, there was a Swedish center back, and we all hear stuff, about this, that, and the other thing. Who knows what's true? But there seems like there's smoke there. I don't know. It seems like this may not just be about money and quality resources. It may be Brendan's not getting what he wants, and he wants what he wants. And, maybe Paul Tisdale thinks he doesn't know what he's doing. And on the way to the evidence so far, I'm siding with Paul Tisdale and his algorithm.
Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into because again, my general observation on these types of conversations are that, each of us will pick the bogeyman that we don't like and then fit the narrative around why Celtic are not perceived to be signing lots of great players and attach the blame to the preferred bogeyman. So for you, obviously, it's Desmond. For me, it's, I don't know. So so we don't know these things. What I would be astonished about is just because Rodgers hasn't been offered a contract doesn't mean to say there haven't been extensive conversations about a contract, and that's a very different thing.
Understood, agreed.
And therefore,
yep.
It's slightly I would say it's disingenuous to say, "Oh, I've not been offered a new contract," when in all likelihood there have been significant conversations about that. I think on the topic you just say, "I've got nothing to report," and that's it. You just leave it at that, and no one speculates or looks any further into that. It's a reasonable response. So. Yeah,
Well, let me throw in one more speculative thing, which again fits. I'm of the opinion if you get enough circumstantial evidence, like it's not 100% obviously, but it starts to be directionally where speculating I think goes from just winging it to like reasonableness, even if it may not be correct. His specific comments about the three players last season having made a material input and contribution to the Champions League. That is the kind of that would be the kind of thing that I could see him saying, because Paul Tisdale, who actually might have an idea of what he's doing relative to profiling players, says those guys were not good signings. They weren't profiled properly. We're going to fix this, because again, I'm not pulling this out of nowhere. Tisdale, again, maybe he's lying, but when he was at Exeter, he said he developed his own algorithm to profile players. So he seems to have some interest in this area. Again, I have no idea if he's competent or not. I just get excited because I hear someone talking about profiles and aligning them with how the team plays. It's like, that hasn't happened a lot. So, almost like a defensiveness from Brendan and saying that, well, they helped in the Champions League. And it's like, well, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of beyond the point. So that I want to throw that into as far as the mosaic of why I'm saying what I'm saying, because I think I'm 100% admitting it's speculation. It's just, all these kind of circumstantial evidence lining up leads me to that speculation.
I mean, but the irony of it is that of the three players that cost a lot of money, that we were brought in to provide power and pace, which is what he clearly stated he wanted. I think Engels and Ida had their moments in the Champions League, and there was some good stuff there. But the one who actually made a material difference in a positive sense was Trusty, who he threw under the bus.
Yep. Yeah. And who now appears, we should mention this, Jamai Simpson Poussey, I think that was finalized before we went to recording today. We're recording on Tuesday. So I know there's some speculation on this. I will be shocked if he's not the starting left center back. I just cannot envision a situation where Man City has a guy who's on, unless Carter Vickers is off, which again is not outside the realm of plausible. I don't think it's going to happen, but coming off knee surgery in particular, but I just cannot envision Man City, because they actually have some degree of a football operations department. The guy who was rumored to be, or I guess, was it Harkin or was it Lawwell was the loan manager? I think it was Harkin that was the loan manager there before he left. and when he was rumored to be the director of football back in 2021, incoming for Celtic. So they actually placed their players with a strategy, presumably, and they have people working on that. Why would they? I can't imagine a scenario where a Man City with a soon-to-be 20-year-old center back who might be an up-and-coming star in that level of a club, to send them to Celtic to be a rotational bench player. Like, I can't envision how that would happen. I'm not saying he's better or he should. I'm just saying that I don't know how we sign that guy unless there's some kind of explicit, whether it's in writing or not, like this guy's going to start kind of conversation. I mean, we'll see. I might have egg all over my face, but that's my sense of the situation. But we're going to run short on time here. We want to get into the league overall, because it was, we've been building up this season. So we're as guilty as everybody else in, maybe this is going to be different. So far, in a lot of ways, it wasn't different for the weekend, except for how horrible Rangers were, which was delightful. And when you look at the data from that Motherwell game, it was like us playing against Real Madrid. Only the Real Madrid is Motherwell. I mean, in the Bernabeu, in like the 5-1, like the number of clear shots they had, the amount of counterattacking opportunities they had, the XG was like crazy. I mean, it was just.
See the space? Did you see the space? It was like mind blowing.
It was amazing, and delightfully so. And it did look to me as if it's a system where it's a combination of players that maybe don't want to be there. And I think his Russell Martin's discussion afterward and all the news, I mean, everyone will have heard what went on after the game, irregardless of whether you think it's a good idea, a bad idea. And you were ahead of the curve on all of this, Alan. So you get credit on pointing all of this out as a systemic problem at Rangers in the quality of character that they were signing of players coming in, whether it was Lundstrom, Cantwell, Raskin. You have the best connections apparently in the world, that these guys were a-holes in the locker room, selfish type of players that were worried about their own interests. And so again, we're the spreadsheet shaggers. When you look at the amount, Rangers were pressing at an insanely high rate, maniac rate, right? But then they have some guys that aren't, apparently, because again, this is the modern era, and now with who's running that club, they'll have tracking data. So Russell Martin will know, if you're a number 8 in my system, these are the number of kilometers you're supposed to run in a game. So when he says in the game, after the game, this idiot was jogging too much, I'm tongue in cheek, he's going to know that. He's not speculating. He's not eyeballing. You say that guy didn't look like he was working really hard. Like, they can actually quantify guys that aren't doing their job. And to me, that's what it looked like. It looked like a high risk system that requires everyone running around like a lunatic. And I'm not saying that derogatory. That's why I've drawn the parallel with Ange Ball. Like, that to a degree was Ange Ball. And if you have a couple of guys, particularly in midfield, that are not doing that in that kind of system, it leaves acres of space. So that's what it looked like to me, was that it was a structural failure because of a few guys that were coasting. And it's not the new guys, let's put it that way, because it looked to me like the guys that have been signed, were the better of the players in that game. But I've used the timeline of Ange's arrival as a benchmark to kind of track what's going on with this shift at Rangers, because of the scope of the difference, squad turnover, the change in style of play, all this stuff, which I would argue is more extreme than what Celtic went through in summer of 2021. Having said all of that, this was a catastrophic failure. That's why I prefaced it with, the data profile being like us going to the Bernabeu. I mean, for Motherwell to kick their ass like this, forget about the 1-1. And even Martin said it in the post game, like they could have lost this game like 4-1
Well, you've actually got to give credit to a lot of the Rangers supporters, because they've not lost a game, and they've got through a round in Europe, and they're all up in arms.
It's amazing.
And which must mean that they study the data and understand that this is actually a shit show.
Yeah.
Right? No, I obviously agree with everything you laid out there, and Martin has got a lot of because he's still in his honeymoon period. He's got through around in Europe, so all the press and all the fans in the press and all the fans on the forums, whatever, are nodding vigorously along with him when he calls out people in that squad, and they've all got in their own minds. Well, I hate Tavernier and I hate Dowell and I hate this way. So they've all got their kind of idea. I think he was talking about Raskin and Diomande and Danilo specifically, personally, which probably isn't who the fans want them to have. They want them to have been to have spoken about. That is true, but what is also true is that a lot of it, if not most of it, is on Russell Martin himself for the way he set that team up. Right, he's had, unlike, and this is a nice counterpoint to what's happening at Celtic. Unlike Brendan Rodgers, he has been backed to the hilt. He has had 9 players in, right, and they've only played one league game, right. They've spent nearly on top of the, and we all know this is a load of bollocks, but whatever it was, 75 million they're alleged to have paid to buy the club is absolute nonsense. But whatever they did end up paying for, and it will have been tens of millions to buy the club. On top of that, on top of the 20 million that's been pumped in from shareholders with the latest share issue, they've committed, and it's not all spent in this window, it's probably 40% of it, they committed nearly another 20 million in transfer fees in making sure that Martin had the players that he wanted in time for these key European qualifiers. He has been backed, and he has had time on the pitch, and this is now the 3rd game of the season to implement the style of play. If anybody starts making comparisons to Ange's first season, I'm not a violent person, but I'm going to get really irritated if people do that because it's absolute nonsense, right?
We could get violent here, Alan.
Yeah, Postecoglou, it took ages, and he said this, to get the players in that he wanted, and that's why, if you look at some of the lineups that we had to field against Midtjylland, for example, there was only one Postecoglou player in there. I think it was Abada, and he was a kid. Mm-hmm. He was like 18 or 19 at the time, right? So Martin has been supported. He's been backed by the board. The players have been brought in early, and he set the team up to play this way. And if you're going to set a team up, so let's start from the back. He's chosen Jack Butland as his goalkeeper. Jack Butland is not good playing short passes out from the back, right? This is the guy Jigger. This guy Jigger looks a reasonable defender, but he's not a good passer of the ball. And he picked him. He brought him in specifically to play this role. Rather than play one of his 2 left backs, he plays Aarons, I think he wants Aarons, is it, as left back. And the guy looks like he's hating it. And it's obvious he's hating it. He's playing like he's hating it. That's not a good attitude, but the guy's clearly struggling in this role. And Martin has put him in that role. To me, the biggest one is this Rothwell. Mm-hmm. Playing Rothwell. Of all the midfielders that he has at his disposal, you think Rothwell is your best number 6 to sit and screen the defence? Oh, my God. I mean, he's not particularly mobile. He's not particularly athletic. He's not particularly big, fast, or strong. He's a nice passer, but a lot of what I've seen in the games that they've played so far, there's a huge, huge swathe of space in that central 6 area that teams have been able to play into, and him behind. I mean, I kind of think you'd probably get more out of Raskin in that sort of position, but no, Raskin, who cannot and will not play the ball with his left foot, has been put onto the left of midfield and asked to play on the touchline in possession, and Diomande on the right. And he's chosen to play Danilo over Dessers. I don't know why he's done that, right? And I accept he's probably been hampered in the wide areas, but I don't know why you would play Dowell, because Dowell's he's just not a good footballer. There's no other, I can't dress it up. He's just not a good footballer. These are all Martin's decisions. That's all on him. And the way he's asked them to play is all on him. So I accept what you're saying, but he's been backed. He's had the money spent. He's got the players in. And this is how he set the team up. So he's astonishingly incoherent. And I think of all the teams, and I didn't see Dundee's game, but they look like an absolute disaster. I do worry about Kilmarnock. Not a worry. Be bothered if they go down or not, but I do worry that they've lost a lot of good players. They've lost McInnes. I think they may struggle. But after that, if you look, not necessarily quality, not necessarily which is the best team, just which was the least coherent team, it would be them by a mile. And by the way, Motherwell, although they'd played 4 League Cup matches, when was the last time Motherwell played passing out from the back football? I honestly can't remember, and I'm hoping somebody please correct me. It might be when Willie Pettigrew was playing in the 1970s. I don't know. When was the last time Motherwell played like this? They've had 4 League Cup games against lower league opposition, which apparently didn't go very well. And I thought, I didn't think they were particularly brilliant on the weekend, but my God, they looked more coherent. They looked more like everyone understood what their jobs were, understood what their roles were. They just didn't execute it very well because, no disrespect to Motherwell, but they're kind of English League One players, right? And
that's my worry for them this season. Is there'll be another St. Johnston? Yeah.
But listen, fair play to them. They stuck to it, and they had by miles the better of the game. So fascinating weekend. On the theme of coherence, we saw a good game on Sunday. Falkirk Dundee United. Falkirk,
excellent
again,
game.
probably with St Mirren. They've made only 2 signings: Scott Bain and 38-year-old Brian Graham. But they have a way of playing which it doesn't matter. They can swap out various players in every position, and it doesn't change the way they play, and it doesn't change the quality. The only player that they've got, which is like their Callum McGregor, that they cannot replace, is Brad Spencer, who's their number 6 in the tempo setting. Now, I don't know if they've got enough quality. I don't know if they've got enough physicality and pace in the team to not get dragged into a relegation battle. But what they have got is they've got a coherent way of playing. Everyone knows their jobs, and they won't get beat because they don't know what they're doing. And then they're not coherent. They're not all together. They're not well organised. Dundee United, I'm not sure. I mean, they've made a huge number of signings. I'm not quite sure what their style is yet. I guess that will emerge. I still feel the same about Aberdeen. I don't know what Jimmy Tillene's trying to do with that side. I honestly, I'm not. I genuinely don't know what they are. But listen, all this is
Monday didn't clarify that either.
No, but all this is really just set up to talk about our favourite topic, I think, this season, which is going to be Blooming Hearts, as I think they're now being called. And we actually saw Tony Bloom. Tony Bloom, this strange little guy. I don't want to be disrespectful. The guy's got the brain the size of a planet, but typical of people who are incredibly clever in the mathematical sphere. He's probably got other kind of unique personality traits that go along with that. But interesting little guy. Certainly, and he said some pretty interesting things, hasn't he?
He did. None of them surprising to me, anyway. Mostly aligned with what I wrote in my first piece back in February about speculating on probably how he was approaching this and addressing it, and why he was coming to Scotland, and why did he pick Hearts. So it all kind of fit. Once it looked like to me it was going to happen back over the winter. But again, I think that the game against Aberdeen spoke to a couple of vitally important things that also it basically, and I talked about it last week with Martin and also with Laura, is that, the synchronicity of recruitment with profiling. That's why I went through all that stuff with, falling off. If I'm going to have to pick sides in the Civil War, the newest Civil War at Celtic, I would go with the guy doing the profiling. And Tisdale is, assuming that's what's happening, it's so important. And we're going to have a podcast come out, an interview I did with someone probably next week, maybe, talking about this more in the analytics space in the industry. But, people that are really into analytics across sports, head coaches are the people that screw things up the most. Because they're human, because they just make dumb decisions, because they're not necessarily great at aligning strategy with profiling. And I mean, that's really, when push comes to shove, that is what the analytics revolution has been about: getting smarter and having it actually manifest on the field or pitch or court or ice or whatever you're playing. And I still hold out hope based off of listening to Bloom in his different interviews and in seeing how they played. They look just like USG. Like, it's clear now that that's what's going to be the playing style. We had one of our subscribers talk about that, or somebody on Twitter, I think it was, maybe, that they just ran around a lot and didn't play that good of football. I was like, well, have you watched USG? Like, that's, they're not pulling guys out of the third division of Italy to play glamorous football.
I think people need to be very clear here. When we talk about Union Saint-Gilloise, talk about Tony Bloom and what have you, just because we're talking about people being smart and acting in a very highly rational way and making really good decisions, doesn't mean to say they're going to play silky football. These two things do not tolerate.
They want to win.
They may tolerate in the English Premier League. There's no way that Brighton could play like Wimbledon of the 80s and win in the English Premier League, like Barnsley tried or whatever. And Brighton, because they're established in the English Premier League and because they're not actually a small club, I think they've got something like 30,000 fans, right? They're a decent-sized football club, and they've now been in the English Premier League long enough that they've got sufficient fun. They've sold so many players for so much money, they can actually afford to buy high-quality technical footballers. So, just because, Tony Bloom's smart, just because they've got great analytics, that doesn't mean they're going to play silky passing football. It's going to be smart football.
The exact opposite. That's so. We'll have another guest coming up soon, hopefully later this month, talking about some of these issues. I always talked about Barnsley and playing Sky Ball, and how ugly that was, but very effective. Almost got them into the Premier League. So this was never about Hearts playing silky smooth football. The opposite of that they're going to be using physicality, work rate. I mean, I joke. I put it on in a tweet yesterday. I'd love to see the tracking data between Shanklin and Braga in that game, because Braga ran around like a freaking lunatic.
There were three occasions in the second half, because Aberdeen were kind of in control of the ball, didn't do a lot with it, where Hearts broke up the field, and they broke quickly. And there was 3 Hearts players on the edge of the box, and Shanklin was just jogging on about 20 yards behind. It's just awful.
Yeah. So that was, and we'll wrap up here with this. So that was what I took away from Bloom's various interviews, and in watching that game, was that McInnes will be a problem between selection and this hung up on Shanklin, because it's all about profile and system. The reason why USG has been able to overperform, a frontier part of that is that their 2 strikers cover copious amounts of real estate and providing pressure. And you cannot defend in their system against better teams going to Celtic Park, going to Ibrox, going to Hibs, and have your, captain and he's a guy that Russell Martin would call out because his tracking data sucked. And again, I don't actually think he was not trying necessarily. He's just a slow guy. Like he's not, him being pedal to the metal has never been his style of play. So, he'll score a bucket load of goals because they're going to be a threat because of the chaos that they're going to. It's just their style of play is a royal pain in the ass because of the athletes. You saw McEntee, that guy running around. He's like a freaking horse, just galloping up and down. It's like I said, it's like watching USG again. But this problem is intractable, and I'm within a margin. Like, I'm not saying it's going to be a major problem, but I think it does shift the odds a little bit from, this being a potential like threat this season to win the league, which again, you can't rule it out. But I think with this kind of I tweeted about this a little while ago. How long will it take McInnes to figure out that Shanklin's his 4th best forward for this system? And I suspect that'll be slow, if ever. So, that'll be. And by the way, I know it was a 2-0 win, but if you look at the underlying data, Aberdeen had like twice the XG. This was not a dom in the first half because it was like
it's early days.
Yeah, first half Hearts controlled the game, and it was a bit of a physical onslaught. But to some of the people's comments were on point. Not like they were creating great chances. They were just. The other thing is they're going to foul a ton because, again, that's strategic. And that does scale to Scotland because the refereeing is so bad.
Yeah.
It's going to be nothing but fouls when we play them there. So I'm dreading going to Tynecastle because I think it's going to be a nightmare. I'm not saying we can't win or that we won't get results against them, but there's enough there already with coherence, to your point. I don't think I think McInnes will be enough of a problem to limit the upside of that coherence, because he's Derek McInnes, and he's, they may even still go back to Craig Gordon in goal. I mean, that's going to be when I'm going to throw a party, is if they end up doing that when he gets fit. But it'll still be enough that they're going to be really difficult to play against, just because of the style of play and the profiling of players that they have signed. A lot of fast guys that run for days.
What was interesting if you watch the Tony Bloom interview with the Foundation of Hearts, which is I've retweeted it, you have as well. It's well worth the watch, and we also Tony Bloom probably on Sky Sports. Across those two things, what was fascinating, especially in the Foundation of Hearts, which was a long interview, is I might have watched it quite late at night, and my memory might be failing, but I don't believe he mentioned Derek McInnes once. He mentioned Graham, and when you talk about Graham is Graham Jones, who's effectively McInnes' boss, right? He mentioned him quite a lot. He didn't mention McInnes once. And the other thing was, when you saw McInnes, and he got a little bit prickly when Tony Bloom's hopes and aspirations were laid out for him. McInnes will be under pressure, and he won't like that. Because he thinks he knows best. He's doing his job. So I'm quite liking this little soap opera.
I think it's going to add a lot of spice to the season, both from hopefully it'll be a mess that McInnes ends up getting the axe, because he doesn't play ball with what he's supposed to be doing, and I guess again that was also what was clear from the various interviews, was that this is not a autocratic implementation of an operating model. We're basically giving you the golden goose who's going to deliver you these eggs. And if you want to take those eggs and fry them up into scrambled eggs like an idiot, there's nothing stopping you from doing that. So we can all rejoice that playing Shanklin at striker in that system, playing that style of play, is turning golden eggs into, I'll even say it, scrambled eggs with ketchup. So with that, an American absolute debacle that people do in the U.S. So that's it for this week. We're going to dive into a lot of the player-specific issues. I'm going to fight Alan on this comparison issue with Rangers and the transitions under Postecoglou versus Martin, and what's going on Thursday when we record our extra time show with Martin. For people that are subscribers, that should be a bang up show. We have some great shows coming up, specials coming up. Patrick's going to be rejoining us soon. In the coming weeks to revisit what's going on at Rangers. So we'll get his thoughts. He's spending more time now. He's got a great Substack, Patrick Caskey, who's been a regular guest of ours in the past. So looking forward to having his thoughts on all these transitions as well. So Alan, it's great to have you back.
Yeah, just sorry, James. Just to say on that, I know it's the first of the new season. This is our what we call flagship, really, because this is the continuation of the Huddle Breakdown show that we did with Enda, that we always did once a week. And it's free to air, and it continues to be so. It's hugely grateful for all the support that we get. But if you do want more, if you do like this, and you do want an awful lot more, please do think about subscribing to the HuddleBreakdown.com. You'll get an even longer, more in-depth podcast in addition, as well as a ton of written stuff as well. Great news: the Yorkshire Whistler is signed on for another season, so those will be free to air as well. That will come out later in the week. When he's had a look at the incidents from the weekend, I wonder how many weeks before we start introducing Hearts games into that as well. I don't want to by stealth. I might increase his workload a little bit. We'll see if that's required. But yeah, so there's a ton of extra stuff there on HuddleBreakdown.com that I hope you feel is worth subscribing to over and above your support for this free podcast. As James mentioned, there's also a lot of special interviews that we do with world leading industry experts in fields that are directly or indirectly related to the world of football and analysis.
Yep. So I'll also mention we'll be previewing what looks like already it's going to be a pretty big game at Pittodrie on the weekend, going up to Aberdeen. So lot to dig in there.
Two raw omelets at this stage.
Yes. I have to say,
analogy today.
first hot take from watching the game last night is that guy they signed. I think he's a winger. Milanovic looks pretty decent.
Oh yeah, he's good. Yeah, I liked him. Yeah.
If they drop Teskin, I might be more worried. But we'll get into that with Gavin at some point. But thanks for everybody joining us, and we'll catch you on the flagship here next week.